Okay, Brent Swallow back with you for the second mini lecture on this area in Module 3 on local and place-based foods. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. So we saw in the previous module, the previous mini lecture, in a way, the size and growing dimensions of local food, and with adding more and more kind of types of initiatives each year, more and more dollars spent on local food, more farmers earning more money, more interest by government. So what's the big deal, right? What is this really just all that it's cracked up to be? So this is so it's a few pieces of this that I want to present. Kind of let's think about this as a what's the controversy? Okay, one of the controversies for me is that people add everything they could possibly think of to what their expectations are for local food initiatives. So in about 4 years ago in Milan, Italy, there was a World Food Expo. And coming out of that was this Milan Urban Food Pact that 171 countries have signed on to, and I think including Edmonton. And its principle is listed here: to work to develop sustainable food systems that are inclusive, resilient, safe, and diverse, that provide healthy and affordable food to all people in a human rights-based framework that minimize waste and conserve biodiversity while adapting and mitigating impacts of climate change. So I've underlined kind of what are the goals, and you can see there are 1, sustainable, that's a big goal, inclusive is a big goal, resilient is 3, safe is 4, diverse is 5, healthy is 6, affordable is 7, and all people is 8, a human rights framework is 9, minimizing waste is 10, conserving biodiversity is 11, mitigating impacts of climate change is 12, and adapting to climate change is 13. So we have 13 different objectives for an urban food system. Clearly, there will be trade-offs with these, and to think that you could really do one set of things to achieve all these goals is unrealistic. So I guess that's one of my bugaboos about this, is that people sometimes can just assume everything wonderful about food systems will be achieved with a regional approach to food. And is that, do we really have much evidence of that? So let's get into under the hood of this a little bit then. From a social political perspective, this is from Henricks and the Franklin papers that I list below here. There clearly people are drawn to the idea of local food because they are kind of concerned about what they call food from nowhere. That often when you go into supermarkets and you just see a product, so some generic box of cereal, you can just think that that just sort of appeared on supermarket shelves and it doesn't really have an origin other than from the supermarket shelf, right? Those may be sort of things you get from global supply chains. They are very efficient, partly because they do draw upon ingredients from all over the world that are cheapest and safest and meet their requirements of their recipes. These are systems dominated by transnational food corporations. People think of them as very homogenized. If you go into one Sobeys, it's like going in another Sobeys. You go into one superstore, it's just like going to another superstore. And bland, right? And basically not standing out. The idea is local is an alternative to that, right? Alternative to food from nowhere will be a food that's from somewhere, somewhere in terms of geography, somewhere in terms of the relationships between you as a consumer and people who produced it. So there's some tie in some way, possibly somewhere in terms of values, like we saw with that long list from the Milan Food Pact. So this is getting at this idea of from somewhere. Local food is seen then as also more authentic, whatever that means, more traceable for a food safety perspective. So it's a real thing, is if there's a food safety problem, you want to be able to trace it to where that came from. But that might be simpler with a local food system. That's true. It also perceived to be higher quality and fresh, as I said, with that kind of the 100-mile diet quote. Some local food initiatives, like Food for Good, are trying out different social enterprises and non-traditional business models. So this social enterprise is when you have, say, a particular goal of, let's say, a social enterprise might be to improve quality of food in northern communities, that's the goal. And then you have an organization possibly a for-profit organization or a not-for-profit organization that sets that out as its goal. Local is often considered to be more sustainable in terms of economic, social, and environmental outcomes. That's what I'm going to get to by the end. And as they say, it may downplay trade-offs, and that Milan Food Pact statement clearly downplays the trade-offs among those 13 different objectives they have for that. What they note is that these local food movements can be vulnerable to a few traps, and this is, I think, a pretty important slide for this module, is the local trap. And that is, if you think that local food is good, that other things that you're sourcing local are good, you might sort of use local as your easy kind of go-to for getting at things which are superior products. So may say, if it's local, it's good. And you might think about that might end up being a trap in that you are less tolerant for things outside of local. So at some point, local may be almost a form of kind of xenophobia, that you're focused and you may be biased against others. There's another kind of related thing of defense of localism. And that is, if you try to distinguish your local thing from someone else's local thing, then you set up the possibility of saying, this is our stuff that's in our local area, and that's their stuff over there that's in their local area. So you have things like what happens in Red Deer, where they're equally distant from Calgary and Edmonton. Do we think of, well, how might they think of local in that context, right? So we can have this kind of us and them, and that can lead to uncooperative business practices and kind of little islands of food systems. It certainly can end up being sort of a luxury if it's expensive, if it's costly, right? If local products are more costly, it can, and you really overly promote it, you can be promoting a costly thing, and you might either load costs on lower income consumers, or actually have biases against low income consumers. And the other thing that it assumes is that what's good, say, from the economic perspective is also good from a social perspective, is also good from an environmental perspective, and that may just not be the case, right? So if people are using local as a heuristic for guiding their choices, there might be lots of kind of traps that they're falling into. The next thing I want to do is sort of, what's the alternative? So another story about location relative to food is about place-based food. And I like try to keep those two concepts separate. Local food being primarily produced and consumed within the same area. Place-based food just has a clear origin and an origin story, in a way, of how and where and by whom it was produced. This is really a big deal in Europe, where there are many societies that have had local, strong and long traditions by which they make certain foods. That has been brought into a designation in the European Union called the European Appellation of Origin, where this government agencies can kind of certify the story about a particular area. And that might come, for example, with a name, let's say the name of the area. So Camembert cheese or Roquefort cheese are, cheese produced in Camembert, cheese produced in Roquefort in a certain way. And so that has kind of formalized into a whole set of products which are clearly labeled as place-based. And if you go to any supermarkets, you can see that a product which is from that area, so Camembert cheese, which is produced in the Camembert area, using the traditions and traditional practices of that area, can be called Camembert. Cheese which is just like it, but produced somewhere else, might not be able to be called Camembert. It's just maybe just called soft white cheese. So there are these kind of appellations of origin. In particular, just champagne is another one compared to sparkling wine. There might be geographic indicators which are used for a particular area. So Ethiopia, for example, has a geographic indicator of its coffee. And these things are actually regulated by government offices. So Canada has an intellectual property office which regulates certification of origin within Canada, but also products coming from all of these different countries. So if you think about this, you might think about different place-based foods that you see and kind of think about, well, what's the story behind that? And there's a beautiful video, this YouTube video of the Roquefort area and Roquefort cheese and how it's producing caves in Roquefort area that have certain fungi, and that fungi is sort of what gives a distinctive flavor to the cheese. Okay, so place-based food. This is similar to local food, but it is really focused on the production side, and you may consume a place-based food anywhere in the world. It has more nuance to not just where the product is produced, but also how, and has some connection to cultural significance. So this is in terms of the physical geography where it's produced, but also say above a certain altitude above sea level or in certain caves. So there's more specifics about the physical geography. There might be attributes of how it's produced, like the breed of an animal, or the types of soils, or the fungi. You might have a certain smell or taste or color. And then there have been this recognizing that the development of that particular way of producing the food has cultural meaning and has been developed over time by the inhabitants of that area. Clearly, this is used to a marketing advantage to some areas that are older in the production may be kind of given certain rights to certain names, and that might come at the disadvantage of people who produce the same product nearby, but aren't able to label it in the same way. So this is clearly a kind of a marketing technique to link place to other attributes about the product. What they say is that especially both the place but also local-based foods tend to have a romantic idea about our agrarian past that may or may not really still be a reality. There might be some tensions between what individuals do to label their products and what a collective does. If I want to have more local food, am I doing it in competition with the other, say, restaurants in the area to give myself a marketing edge? Or do I want to be part of an entity like all of the restaurants in this certain area to give all of us a marketing advantage. Clearly, both local and place-based foods overlook these trade-offs, and we're going to get into that in a minute. Often, those who promote local and place-based foods do so because they value that and they like it. They have associated certain norms with these foods that actually may make them out of touch with many other people in their society, maybe even the majority of people in their society. And here's this case from Stroud in the UK, where they identify that about 20% of the people, so this is a rural area in the United Kingdom that had become the home of many kind of people in the arts community who were pretty invested in local food. For them, they had this strong sustainability agenda, and you can see how they were characterized as greens, hippies, artsy types, where the majority of Strouders, so Stroudies and Strouders, were less engaged in that whole agenda. So there was an implicit kind of othering that happened between those who were kind of embracing local and sustainable food and those who were not, and you have the potential for kind of cultural barriers created within that. So I'm going to stop this module now, so that's quite a bit for you to chew upon in terms of the kind of social analysis of local and place-based foods. So I'm going to stop share and stop recording.